Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to our Email for All webinar. Firstly, just a quick note, if you'd like to add captions to this session, you'll find a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's labeled with the CC symbol, and this turns on the captions for you. Next, if you don't know who ActionRocket are, hello, we're an independent CRM creative agency based in London, and we help to nurture long-term relationships between brands and their customers. We use channels such as email, web, push, SMS, and social to make sure that brands love the messages that they send and their customers love receiving them. Back in 2021, Email for All was created, and we partnered with Paul Airy. This was a joint initiative focusing on improving email accessibility, and the aim was to make email experiences more inclusive for everyone. And now we're 4 years later, and accessibility is still, if not more, important than ever. So this webinar today is all about helping you understand the importance of accessibility, what the new laws mean, and actions that you can take right after this session. As many of you watching will know, the EU Accessibility Act came into effect in June last month, and this introduced new requirements for digital communications. So today we'll discuss the importance of making sure that your brand is not just compliant with those new laws, but that you're creating and sending inclusive, user-friendly messages that work for everyone, no matter the channel or how the end user reads them. So here's what we've got lined up for today. First, we'll set the scene and break down what these new laws actually mean and who they apply to. Then we'll be speaking to our expert panelists who will be giving guidance across copy, design, development, and tech. And finally, we'll wrap up with some next steps that you can take and a live Q&A. So if you do have questions throughout, then please do drop them into the little Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen. The ActionRocket team will be replying to some questions throughout the session in the chat, and then we'll choose some of them at the end to ask the panel. So if we don't get around to answering your question, or you'd like a bigger conversation around a specific area, then please do reach out to us after this session and we'll help to support you where you need it. Let's get into some intros. Firstly, hi, I'm Bex. I'm a strategist here at ActionRocket and I'll be your host for today. And then moving on to our panel, Claire.
Hi, I'm Claire Medcalf, Head of Copy at ActionRocket.
I'm Jay, I'm Head of Dev, so I look after all the code that comes out of ActionRocket.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm Senior Customer Success Manager at Bloomreach.
Amazing. So getting into the details first, Len, let's start with you, Jay. For anyone watching who maybe doesn't fully understand what exactly the new laws are, can you explain what the new EU Accessibility Act actually is?
Yeah, so we've had the WCAG guidelines for a long time that tell us how to make content accessible, but the new European Accessibility Act has basically brought it into law. And they've also added a lot of other guidelines to say, if you're sending an email to anyone who's from a European country or is receiving an email in Europe, then you should be following these guidelines essentially. Otherwise, you could end up with fines. And the fines vary per country and how they work. But yeah, essentially, it's anyone in Europe now gets a really good accessible experience on all digital platforms.
Cool. Okay. And what channels does the Act apply to? I'm guessing it's more than just email, right?
Yeah, so even though we'll be focusing on email, it basically applies to everything that's digital. So any digital touch point that your company touches should be accessible from now on. So email, web, any digital products, apps, services, communications, anything like that needs to be made sure that it's accessible.
Okay, and can you explain why these laws actually matter and why they should be taken seriously?
Yeah, so 1 in 5 people in the UK, so 20%, have some kind of accessible reason that they need assistance. So any assistive technology, whether that's a screen reader or using keyboards or anything like that, they need a way to access any of these digital things. But then also, like for legal compliance, you want to make sure that you're fully compliant. You don't want to be getting any of these fines. But then really from like a general point of view, you want a really inclusive design and a really good customer experience so that people not only read your messages and interact with them, but also when they go through to any of your digital touch points, they're getting the best out of what they do. And you're making it accessible for everyone because you want everyone to buy your stuff or go to your webinars or anything like that. You don't just want the 80% of people that can touch it. You're missing out on 20% of your audience if you don't.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And finally, what would you say are the most common misconceptions around accessibility?
So the first one is it's just for screen readers. So as I mentioned before, it's all assistive technology. So it might not be screen readers. It might be someone who needs a bigger touch point. So that's where we make buttons a certain size. It might be someone with neurodivergent or cognitive disabilities that need larger font sizes, the way fonts are structured, things like that. It could be anything. And also, like we mentioned before, it's not only for websites, it's for any digital touch point. So make sure that you're doing everything. It's not only for designers to worry about. In fact, I think accessibility should be worried about across the whole company, from the C-level right the way down to the person's hitting send. If everyone keeps an eye on accessibility, then it means that everyone has a really good experience. The myth that it's a bit expensive to fix, I think it really is a myth. So just by taking small steps that we're going to outline today, which is not going to take you very long, you're automatically creating a much better experience for your users. And also, like by doing these little fixes, you're probably doing 99% more than anyone else is if they aren't following these things. So you could be in the top 1% of accessible experiences just by doing what we're talking about today. And then lastly, my customers don't require it. That is a really big myth. Obviously, if you've never given accessible content, that someone who needs accessible content can't access it, then they're not going to be your customer, right? So you need to make things accessible to allow people to come in, and then you'll find customers that maybe you didn't even know existed. So yeah, the fact that, oh, you know, we don't have anyone that uses a screen reader, there's a reason that, because your stuff is not accessible. So make it accessible, and people that need a screen reader will be able to use it. So yeah, really important, those things. And also, you really want to make sure that you have the best possible experience. And the person I know who can give you a really good experience with anything digital is Claire. So I'm going to pass on to her.
Thanks.
Great segue. So Claire, let's get into copy and content, and we'll go over things like tone, clarity, inclusive language, and why these are really important for brands to consider. So firstly, what do you think are the biggest accessibility issues with email copy today?
The first, I think, is lack of clarity. One of the key kind of accessibility requirements is to provide clear information, reasoning, and instruction. So great emails should do this anyway, but there are a lot, unfortunately, inboxes full of emails that don't. It's more than an accessibility point. Like brand emails at the very least should be clear and give compelling reasoning. Otherwise, how will the recipient know what to do and why it's worth doing? Second point, lack of empathy. So across all marketing, we should be thinking about the person on the receiving end. I think many brands fall back into the bad habit of thinking of themselves. It's really easy to see how this happens, because as a marketing manager or working on an account, you're living and breathing that brand and a product, and it's easy to see why you would be focusing on its features. But we need to keep the recipient in our minds at all times, and the benefits to them, but also what they're thinking, feeling, doing, how they're digesting the content that we're sharing. Emails are going to be more accessible and effective if we keep the recipient front and center, like Jay said at the beginning there.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't spoken to your customers for a long time, then maybe talk to them and figure out what they want to know. And then that will give you a big input of empathy straight away.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, so another issue I've put here is lack of copywriters. So I'm not going to go into a huge rant about AI, but there was a great story. Jay met someone at a conference who works for a big brand who had, I think, invested a lot of time and money, 6 months, kind of investigating how they could get AI to write their copy, and it didn't work. And I think that's partly because depending how good you are at prompting it, you're not going to get really clear, succinct copy coming out the other side. But the bit it doesn't do either very well is that empathy. I think copywriters are your best bet at making emails easy to understand and ultimately accessible. You'll see from some of the points we go on to that there's a lot of match up between the guidance in the accessibility guidelines and also how we would want to write emails anyway.
Mm-hmm. And how can brands make sure that their copy meets these accessibility standards?
Well, here we go. Hire a copywriter. Just going to continue that cheeky plug. But no, honestly, as I said, looking through the guidelines, lots of what's needed is what makes good copy. So avoiding complexity, short, clear sentences and paragraphs, formatting. Your copywriters, or we could introduce you to one if you don't know one, they know how to do this. And I think just to add that to that, if there are any copywriters or you want to level up in your writing when it comes to accessibility, I'd recommend a newsletter called Fighting Talk by Etty Bailey King. So she's on a mission to make words more inclusive and accessible, and it's her guide to inclusive language and accessible communication. So really recommend that. And thirdly, collaborating with design and code. So again, it mentions using formatting and using images to help clarify meaning. And I think the best way to do this is working closely. So me as a copywriter working closely with design and code to see how we can make sure that that message is the clearest it can be.
And I'd add to that like at ActionRocket, we all sit together and we all give each other feedback, and every single bit of feedback we give is obviously meant from a really good place. So if I say that Claire's copywriting doesn't make sense to me, she doesn't take that personally that she's a terrible copywriter, because she's not. What she does is listen to what I'm saying and understand and evaluate what's going on, and then we feed it back. And we do the same with clients, and we do it at every stage of the way. So definitely just collaborate with everyone. And also there's a really good story from Megan Bushrosen from Email on Acid, where she sent an email and one of her buttons wasn't contrasted with the background, but she didn't realize that. So she only realized after people got back to her and gave her feedback on it. So from now on, she gets more feedback on what's going on from a wide range of people to see if things can be made better, especially for accessibility.
Amazing.
And there we go. Embrace QA.
Embrace QA. I think, just adding that extra viewpoint to the sign-off process. So it kind of comes back to that empathy point, like having your empathy hat on when you are reviewing that email before it leaves the building. Is it accessible for everyone? Maybe add a screen reader put to your QA process and make sure it's flowing as it should through those accessibility tools.
Great. And are there any quick wins for brands to make their emails more accessible right now when they're thinking specifically about copy?
I don't know if these are quick wins, but rather that just the main requirements to meet the laws. So I'm just going to list a few kind of rules that we should be following. So using headings to create structure. So headings really help kind of provide the outline of the content, convey the meaning, and organize the content. This one, I think it's sometimes easy to think this would only refer to longer form content on the web, but actually, if you can open an email and scan like the headlines and subheads and know exactly what's going on there, and you know what you're going to get in those sections, it makes it more accessible to everybody, but also will help when it goes through the accessibility tools as well. Making link text mean something. So rather than having kind of hyperlinks with click here, it's all about giving an idea of where this link is going to. I think, as Jay said at the beginning, the guidelines are for every digital touch point, and something we've been talking about here at ActionRocket is how does this translate when it's a call to action button that has short amount of space? Like, how can we really give context to where that's going when there's only space for 2 words? I think where we're landing is it's so read more and shop now are actually they're okay because they give a sense of where you're gonna land. If it's shop now, you're gonna end up on a shop, and the body copy ahead of that is going to give you the context. Whereas explore now might not work hard enough. Maybe that should be something like browse products, so you know what you're meant to do when you get there.
I guess, making it as easy as possible for that journey and end point.
No surprises, basically.
And something that me and Claire have talked about a lot as well is that the European Accessibility Act actually goes a little bit further than the WCAG guidelines and says that the whole user experience should be accessible. So if your link goes to somewhere and it's not somewhere you're expecting, then that's not accessible, so you will fail. So even if your link text is amazing, the link works, if you say shop now and then you go to a page and you can't buy anything, that's not an accessible experience. So you would fail technically for the European Accessibility Act. It doesn't mean no more Rickrolls, but
we'll keep doing it in Email Weekly.
Yeah.
Nothing will stop us. Writing alt text for images. So this really is the big one. I think it's something that has been overlooked for a long time, but now it is a legal requirement. The alt text, image alt text should provide information or the function of that image. Like purely decorative images don't need it, but if they're linking to something, then they do. Otherwise, it will read out that like file name. It's about the context of the email, and Jay's actually written a great blog on our website all about like the individual points of creating correct alt text. So I recommend going to have a read of that. But yeah, let's make sure we're doing this now.
Amazing. Thank you, Claire. So now let's move on to accessible design and development with you, Jay. So firstly, how can brands make email templates more accessible through design best practices?
The first one is semantic HTML. So this is more developer wise, but basically any element that you're using, you should just use the element what it's for. So if you have a heading, use a heading element. If you have a paragraph element. Don't try and make something else fit just because of the way email works. If you can go with semantic code. So all of your emails, any text that's inside a TD should be inside a paragraph tag or a H1 tag or anything like that. So make it semantic. That's the first big point. The second one is clear hierarchy, which is kind of following on from what Claire mentioned from copy. So they're going to have those clear headings. They're going to have short, concise words and things like that. So make it a clear hierarchy. Do the inverted pyramid. Do a Z design, the classic way. Everything looks the right. And yeah, trying to keep it as good a design, but not to keep it simple enough, not overcomplicated. And then also, yeah, another thing which I was going to jump in and say for Claire, but like anytime someone opens an email, a lot of people say you have between 8 to 20 seconds to see what's going on before maybe you go to the next one. So if you have a clear hierarchy, clear layout with copy, then straight away you're going to make a really good impression when someone opens your email.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then lastly, keep it simple. So the layouts, the designs should be simple for email. You're not remaking a whole website. So keep it nice and simple. You want to go straight to the point, keep it concise, keep it clear. And we're not saying that simpleness is like, you can design for simpleness and it still looks great. It doesn't have to look really simple the whole time.
Cool. And what are some small design tweaks that can make a big difference in usability?
The first one is line height. So line height is where the gap between your letters, basically, when you have a new line. So the WCAG guidelines, or I'm going to call it WCAG from now on because it's much easier. So WCAG says you should have 1.5 or 1.5 times the line height for your font size. So if your font size is 16 pixels, your line height should be 24 pixels. And that just means that there's enough gap between the letters that people can distinguish between it, and it keeps the copy really clear. And yeah, it's just a nice way, a much nicer reading experience when there's a good line height.
Also makes the copy much easier to read.
Yeah. So Claire's going to write amazing copy, and then I just squish it all together so no one can read it. So yeah, make sure you've got that line height in there so everyone
keep your copywriters happy.
The next point is color contrast. So color contrast is, say you've got some text on a background color, you want to make sure that they have enough contrast that you can read them easily. So WCAG has 3 different levels of accessibility. Level A is you give someone an alternative experience, which isn't really possible in email. So the 2 levels that we're really interested in is level AA and level AAA. Level AA has a 4.5 to 1 ratio of color contrast, which most brands will have as their guidelines. And you'll notice 4.5 to 1 if you don't have it. So if you have light gray text on a white background that's really difficult to read, you'll know straight away that the contrast isn't there. But for the AAA contrast, that's 7 to 1. And a lot of brand guidelines, especially like newer ones where there's quite funky colors, it's sometimes their brand guidelines are not going to reach that 7 to 1 contrast ratio. And that's an okay thing to be. You only have to do 4.5 to 1. But to be the most accessible and hit that level AAA, you do need 7 to 1 color contrast. And then clear calls to action. So Claire kind of already mentioned it, that like the whole reason for your email, right, is to get someone to click on something. So a clear call to action that is written with good, meaningful link text is going to get you all of those clicks. And, you know, if one of your KPIs is to hit the click to open rate or your clicks, then that's a really important point. And clear call to action mean that it's an obvious button or an obvious link which has a good contrast on the background, the text contrast for the button, it's obvious where it's going to go, and also it fits in with the design. So just make your calls to action really clear.
And next, what should development teams be thinking about when it comes to screen reader compatibility?
So the first one is alt attributes. So Claire already mentioned it already, that you need to have an alternative text attribute for your images. So from a development point of view, every single image should have an alt tag, even if it's blank. So if you've got a divider image, which is just like a funky line, you don't need to describe that to a screen reader. So you can just add an alt attribute, which is completely empty. But any image that has a link, if you don't have an alt attribute, as Claire said, it's going to read out the link. So it's going to be like https://. So that's a terrible experience for a screen reader. So make sure you've got alt attributes set all the way through your code. And that's a really simple fix. So literally just find and replace every image tag and make sure they all have an alt attribute, and you'll be winning. Next is layout mismatch. So this one is a hard one to figure out, especially for email code, which is sometimes a bit limiting. So if on a desktop experience, you've got an image on the left and a text on the right, you want to make sure that on mobile, when it stacks, the text goes underneath and then everything's in the right order. You've got your image first in the code, and then you've got your text. If you're using some other attributes like direction or something, where you change the order of the content before it then stacks, a screen reader might read it in a different order. So if your content doesn't make sense, if the way the code is, you really need to make sure that your layout is correct. So in WCAG, they call that meaningful sequence. So that is an actual guideline that you should have to follow. And then lastly, the first rule of ARIA is don't use ARIA. So ARIA is an attribute where you can describe what something is and how it works. So go back to what I said first of all, use semantic HTML to name things what they are, and then you never have to add ARIA roles. And in email clients, ARIA roles are really not, they don't work very well. They're not all listened to. Not all email clients use them in the right way, and they don't work properly. If you saw the recent Email Markup Consortium report, they did a report based on email clients, and Gmail did terribly, and they don't support ARIA roles. So you really need to make sure that if you are going to use ARIA, you know what you're doing, because you don't want to mess it up and make it go bad. I would suggest that if you're needing to use ARIA, you've already made it too complicated. You need to go back and simplify it and keep it nice and simple.
And finally, what should developers stop doing right now in code?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So the first one is text over background images. So text that is directly on top of a background image, in dark mode, there is a very high chance, because not in all email clients, we can't control what happens, that your text is going to swap from white to black or black to white. And if there's not enough contrast between your background image and your text, someone just can't read it. So dark mode is a thing. It's been around now for a couple of years. Everyone has to deal with it. So the best way to do it is don't put text over background images. If you have to, put a color block behind your text over the top of the image. You kind of lose a bit of design with that, but you're making things more accessible, and it will work on dark mode. And actually, for the past couple of years, our designers have basically just stopped using background images for text. It's not something you have to do to get a good design. So you can move around it. You don't have to have text over a background image. And then the next one is VML. So VML stands for Vector Markup Language. It was a specific language that worked in word rendering engines, which only works on Outlook for desktop on Windows PCs. And basically, the biggest problem with this one is if you use VML to create a background image, even if you put a color block over the top of it, if there is a link inside that VML, then you can't access it at all with a keyboard or assistive technology. So if you can't get to your link to click on it, you've fouled the accessibility laws already. You're failing the WCAG because you can't use a keyboard to navigate through it. But also, your users just can't click on your link. And the whole reason that you're sending that email is for someone to click on a link to go and do something. So if you're using VML, seriously think about where you're using it. If you can get rid of it completely, that's amazing. If you do have to use it, then don't put a link inside it, and make sure that you do put an alt tag on any of your VML elements as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Jay. Now moving on to tech support. And we're going to be discussing how platforms like Bloomreach work with brands to ensure everything they're sending is fully accessible. So I will hand over to you, Tom.
Thank you. So first of all, for everybody who doesn't know who Bloomreach is, happy to give you a short introduction to it. We've got a couple of different products. We've got Discovery, which is our search and merchandising product on the right. We've got Clarity, which is our AI-powered agentic e-commerce tool. But the one that I'm working mostly with, and why I'm actually here today, is engagement, our marketing automation. This is something where we do have the customer data, we've got product data, and then we use the different channels that are out there to communicate to your customers. And these are they match very perfectly with all the channels that Jay already mentioned previously. So this is something where we really see a couple of pitfalls and a couple of issues that came up, and that's why I'm here today.
Oh, so what do you think brands should be asking their platforms and tech partners about right now?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's super important to make sure that the platforms are very flexible when it comes to creating and editing text or content in general. That everything that Claire and Jay just mentioned, that it actually can be done, and that you're able to create anything that you want to do and really bring this to life. Because there is some come with limitations, and then you can't actually create content that is adhering to WCAG. And then in regard to that, also just how can they support the creation of it? Do they have features that already implement some of the creation of WCAG topics, or do they have some workarounds or features that that you can just enable very, very quickly in order to be WCAG compliant? Example for that would be something like a piece of code that it can add to a web layer to a pop-up in order to just tap into it, something that is part of the WCAG Act. So you just basically need to make this available. And testing accessible content, I think this goes along with what Claire says. Well, Q&A, have the email go out, have the SMS go out, have the pop-up launch. This is something very, very important, and I think something that we come up as well in a second is that this is super important to test the things that are like dark mode and how does the text actually really work.
And what are some of the typical questions that you guys have been receiving from customers at Bloomreach recently?
So first of all, the main question we get is, are our features or our channels, are they already ready for compliancy? The thing like the tabbing into a field in any browser window, that's something that's very, very important. The thing is that where we come from is we always said that we want to be very flexible. So we want to make it available in ways that you can change the content. We give a little bit of the ownership of the content to our customers, but in general, we are able to do that.
Perfect. That's good to know.
Test compliancy. Well, it's definitely a topic that comes up very often. I think when we think email, one tool that's very well known is Litmus, something where you can send your email and test it. Of course, you can just test it to yourself and have a look at it. And the other one, what we know is that partners of ours, like Mailgun and Mailjet, they've got their own features or testing capabilities. And we are also looking into implementing this into our feature set.
Nice.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? We want to see if we can implement something, but also staying flexible, because that's very often a little bit the dichotomy there, that if we introduce something where we always comply to something, then we might take away some of the freedom for creation. So we want to be very open in how customers can create the content. Then they can then choose themselves how compliant do they need, which markets are they actually sending to, do they need to be compliant? And that's why we're trying to be a little bit flexible there.
Mm-hmm. And finally, what are some of the biggest issues that you've seen customers be facing at the moment?
So one of the things that I mentioned is the UX compliance, especially when you look at the web. I think that's one that's a little bit more harder to test and actually come through. Email is very text heavy still. So on a web, that might be some issues like tabs and spaces. How can you actually use the different keyboard functionalities, which WCAG actually recommends. Dark mode, I think Jay already mentioned it earlier. So across devices and providers, we see that dark mode can behave differently, and you might need to test and be very careful how your branding, how your colors actually look in different devices and providers. We had one customer with a very beautiful black background and a very dark, beautiful red button. Unfortunately, depending on how they coded it and which device they checked it, it turned into a lovely pink, which is not the brand anymore. And they needed to, in the end, keep it simple. And I think keeping it simple is always a very good recommendation here.
Definitely. We've seen similar things happen with our clients, haven't we, Jay, where things like that have happened and we've had to kind of switch out, look at brand guidelines and see what would work best.
Yeah. I mean, like Tom said, test your colors. That's the biggest thing, because like if you, we've had browns turn to dirty, muddy yellow. We've had oranges turn into horrible brown messes and things like that. And then also the text on top of it looks terrible. So you might just choose not to use that color, right? That might be the easiest way. But it's a love-hate relationship with dark mode, because I use dark mode, but I don't want to code for it.
And it starts out with not being brand compliant, but at some point, if you don't check it, you might really have issues with the with readability because of the colors turning so awkward.
Yeah, because email clients, they try to do their best to make sure everything has the good contrast. And we've even Remy found the algorithm that Outlook.com uses specifically to figure out the contrast. And even then, we've been seeing things that go wrong. So like they are doing their best to make sure contrast works, but sometimes it's just not possible.
Absolutely. Keeping up to date, that means on one end, checking your content and rechecking it, making it more, I don't want to say modern, but just up to date. And then also checking how the Accessibility Act or some other legislation actually is changing. And then looking in just really changing everything around. I mean, like I said, you've got a beautiful branding, and normally that it's maybe coming from from print back in the day, and all of a sudden you need to be modern and put this into any of the digital channels, and then you see that it's actually not working properly. So maybe you need to actually really reinvent yourself and keeping it to make it into the digital age.
I guess that's why things like audits are so important, because what could have been compliant a couple of years ago, things move quickly, you have new things to adhere to, so you need to be doing those audits regularly.
Yep.
And like we've previously had a stat that email clients update every 2 days. So you don't know what an email client is doing day to day. Your email developers are constantly battling those things, but the accessibility stuff that comes up is important as well. Webinars like this, if we have any more, you should sign up to keep you informed. But also look out for good newsletters as well. There's loads of newsletters out there that will give you lots of information about what's going on in the world for email and marketing. So find a good set and make sure you're keeping up on reading.
Yeah. I put a little bonus one here. It's using personalization for compliance. This is something where you know that somebody from your customer base, or you might be struggling in one way or another, and they need to have some help. You might serve them special content. Same thing, just the easy one is obviously language, right? If you know that somebody is not a native English speaker and you've got them from different markets, like me, I'm German, I might not understand the English language that well. So then just send them in their language, send information over and make it work for them.
Don't overcomplicate it again.
Yeah.
Paul Airy, actually, on his Type E newsletter that he sends out, he asked people's personal preference as to whether they would like bigger text, smaller text, if they would like more contrast or not contrast. So he used his preference center not to choose like which brand you want to follow, but which accessibility enhancements could you choose. So that's a really really cool way of using that kind of personalization. So everyone should get an email that they can read based on the feedback you've got.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. So now to wrap up from our 3 panelists today, they've all given us one top tip to leave you with.
I really made this point, but if you could do anything, I'd say have a copywriter write your emails. But if you can't do that, I think just act as if you are and think about, it's that empathy hat. Think about the person at the receiving end of the email and how they're going to experience it.
I'd like to add to that as well that you could have a copywriter write every one of your emails, but not everyone can afford that, obviously. But what you could do is get a copywriting team to review your past month or couple of months' emails to see what's going on. Or you could just get a copywriting team to give you a tone of voice or brand guidelines that include accessibility as well. And maybe even if you are using AI, give you some guidelines on how you could use it safely, etc. So you don't necessarily have to hire a full-time copywriter for your company if you can't afford that. You could get help in other ways.
Yeah, we're nice.
Yeah, most of them are nice to work with. Yeah.
Most of them are nice.
Okay, so I will move over to my one, sorry. So yeah, simple design, semantic code, and less tables. So yeah, if you can delete a table from your code, just get rid of it. You don't need it.
Easy as that. Simple.
Yep.
Yeah, and I didn't want to mention simple again. I thought why not actually really use the personalization? Think of taking that power and really serve something that you know that your end user actually can really use and utilize and read and understand.
Amazing. So that brings us to our Q&A section. If you do have a question, then just put it into the chat box now. We will start with some that we have already received. So let me just have a look. Okay, so how do you approach writing for screen readers or people using assistive tech? Are there specific do's and don'ts for email copy? Claire, I'd probably say this one's best for you.
Yeah, I can take this one. So yeah, I think as we've said throughout, like writing the content as clearly and simply as possible should be the approach anyway, but will help with screen readers. There's not sure about specific do's and don'ts, but more things to be aware of. So things like punctuation, some will mirror natural speech patterns, so pausing after full stops or lifting at the end of a sentence that ends in a question mark, but some will just read out all the punctuation as default. So it's just something to bear in mind. Language, I think, so the English language, as Tom mentioned, like it's a tricky one. So I've read something, I want to read it again, bow, like how are you making sure that it's going to read the right word? And you can't really control that. Some readers are good at choosing the right pronunciation and some aren't, but it's just something to be aware of. And then same with acronyms like VAT or VAT. It's tempting to use punctuation or spaces to make that sound better. But I think I would say don't edit anything specifically for the screen reader. It's just overall writing content that works well for everyone. So it's as simple as possible. And screen readers will get better with time, like everything else, and know what to say when. So.
Amazing. And maybe for yourself or Tom or Jay, do you have any recommended resources for guidance on screen reader accessibility?
Yeah, there's so I will make sure I share the link later. But basically, there's the ADA compliance in the US, and they have a whole section on how to set up screen readers, how to use them, how they work, how to exit them once you're in them, because that's one of the hardest things that you can do is get into a screen reader, then you can't use your keyboard, and then you can never get out of it, and then you don't know what to do. So yeah, there's that, and then also I would just use things like Tom said earlier, like you've got Litmus, Email on Acid. They have tools that have screen readers built in and will read your email out to you. So use those as your first point of call if you're doing email.
Cool. I'm a brand based in the UK. Do these new laws affect us and the communications that we send to our email subscribers?
Yeah, so this one is a big one, and I hear it a lot. And I've heard it from people in the US as well, that obviously a European Accessibility Act doesn't affect me because I'm not in Europe. Unfortunately, it isn't that simple. So if someone from Europe receives one of your emails, then it has to be accessible, or you could be liable. So if you, one of our brands is Pizza Express in the UK. We spoke to them, did some email stuff with them, and they realized that they had a large number of German subscribers. And we were a bit confused as to how that was, because they was using an email client that they could only use if they had an address in Germany. And we think it's because when you sign up for their free Wi-Fi, you have to put your email address in. But Pizza Express was sending them emails. So if someone visits from Europe, America's the same. If someone is visiting from Europe and they receive an email from you, it needs to be accessible. Yeah, so yeah, everyone basically. But also, like in general, if your accessibility is good, you're going to have better results, right? So just be better with your accessibility, and the whole of email will get better.
Are animated GIFs and live elements in emails still okay to use with the new laws?
Yes, with some caveats, but they're kind of caveats that have been around for a while. So GIFs, you want to make sure that it's not flashing lots of times within 3 seconds. That's like a big rule. So you have to make sure that you're not like causing any, like epilepsy is the most common one with this, where you've got flashing images would cause problems. And then another WCAG guideline is that after 5 seconds, if a GIF is longer than 5 seconds, you should have the opportunity to pause it. Now, on the web, that's easy because we can use JavaScript to do that. In email, we can't do that. So any GIFs that you're putting in email should either be shorter than 5 seconds, or if they're going to 5 seconds, make sure that you've left enough time for it to pause where it ends, so that it doesn't feel like it's a continuous loop of content all the time. And there are kind of workarounds, but then they get heavy into the code. So I would just say, be mindful about GIFs that you're using. Don't make them too busy. Don't make them too flashy, and then you'll be okay. Same with live elements, right? You can bring video into email, but you're not going to get the closed captions. So maybe that's not the best place for video. Maybe you should put video on a video streaming platform and send people there where they can get all the accessibility they need. So yeah, think about what you're doing every single step of the way. As Claire said, think about the empathy of your reader, of your recipients, and then you'll be fine.
Maybe one for you, Tom. What if my ESP doesn't allow for this level of control? Do I need to switch ESP to be compliant?
I'm not sure what you mean with this level of control. Normally, when you are creating your content, you should be able to create it in a very simple and easy way. So I'm really not sure how limited you can be in order to create good copy, especially if you should have some kind of HTML editor that you can actually really build something simple and still that looks nice and good. So that would be my first initial thought. And the other one is check out Bloomreach. We can.
Yeah. I think a part of that question I think I saw or someone else asked was that they may not have the ability in a drag and drop editor to choose whether you're using a heading tag or a paragraph tag, so they don't have control over that. So I think the first thing to do is just reach out to your ESP and say, this European Accessibility Act has been around. You've had to be compliant with it, so maybe update your drag and drop editor. But also, we don't want to make everyone have to be a developer to make something accessible. So if you're using a tool, just feed back to them and say, we just want to make sure we're accessible. Can you let us know that we are? And yeah, fall back on their expertise.
Should accessibility become a fixed part of my team's sign-off process? And if so, who should own that? I would say everyone should own that. Yeah. Like we said previously, within the QA process, at every single touch point within internal sign-off, everybody should be QAing it and making sure it looks okay.
Yeah, definitely a joint responsibility that the emails that we create are accessible to everybody.
Yeah, and also just listen to your subscribers as well, or your recipients. Yeah. Like if someone gets in contact with you and says something's not accessible, if you then don't do something, then that's worse. So make sure you're listening. And a good point with that one actually is the deliverability rules that came out for Outlook recently said you can't use a no reply email address. So you should all now have an inbox where you can reply. So if someone replies and says this is not accessible for me, then you need to have someone checking that, because that will be the first place that a European Accessibility Act will look.
Okay, I'll read one more. Would you be able to please elaborate on ARIA labels? We have found that they work amazingly for screen readers and buttons. Should we only have them or alt text in our images?
So for alt text for images, that is the best thing to do. So you don't really need an ARIA role or an ARIA description for an image. The alt text will do exactly the same thing. And because you've used an image element, that's basically telling the email client and the browser that you are using an image, and the alt text should be what you read. Calls to action and links are really tricky in email. So depending on how you've coded your button, you could be using a table. It may not be an accessible link. The whole button might not be clickable. Maybe you've used buttons.cm and got a VML button. All of those things add really complexity. But the biggest thing I would like to point out is that if you're needing to add a description or an alternative ARIA for your button, then maybe step back and think about what Claire said, and does the link already have a good meaning, and is it descriptive? Because if it isn't, then even if someone isn't using an assistive piece of technology, someone who's not using assistive technology is going to look at that CTA and not understand what it does. And then your CTA is not performing as you would want it to be. So if you look at your calls to action or your links and think, oh, it needs something extra to help someone understand what it is, then take a step back and rethink that whole context around that. If you do need to add more to it, then the best way to do that is to add a hidden span either before or after the link text, where that text is only accessible via screen readers or accessible technology. The there is a bit of a myth around there that you can add a title attribute, and a title attribute, you can add a description to it, and that will help. But lots of screen readers don't make that accessible. And when you hover over a link, we don't have the ability to style the way that text comes up. And it always comes up in a little gray box with 10 pixel size font in black, and it's really difficult to read. So I would say there's a lot of old misinformation out there about adding a title attribute to a link to give it a description. Whereas WCAG have 2 guidance documents that say either add a hidden span, or there's another one out there as well that says, the other one says make your link better. So they're the 2 things. So make it more descriptive or add a hidden span, and just follow the WCAG guidelines. So if there's ever a technical thing or an accessible thing that you don't understand, go to the WCAG guidelines, search for it, and then there's always guidance documents where you can click in and they will tell you exactly what to do with the code or design and tell you how they would fix it, and then just follow what they're doing, because they're the experts. They tell us what to do.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, so that's all for today's webinar. Thank you to all 3 of our panelists for joining. If you had a question which we didn't get around to answering, then please send us a message, email us at hello@actionrocket.co, or get in touch through our website or LinkedIn. And if you would like some more help with ensuring that you are fully compliant with these new laws, we have a range of support packages that could help you. So do get in touch and ask us about these. Scan the QR code on the screen and you'll be able to sign up to our agency newsletters. As Jay mentioned earlier, we share lots of helpful hints, tips, and best practices. So keep an eye out, and we'll be sharing lots of resources that mentioned today as well. So yeah, thank you all very much for joining us.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you.